What's up, guys? I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and today I want to talk about smutty literary fiction, and even a little bit about romance and erotica. So, I've read some stuff recently, and that's what inspired me to make the video, but I'd also like to hear from you guys. I think most of you are like me, uh, you know, you're grown-ups, you read books for grown-ups, sometimes they have sex scenes in them, but I'd like to know what you think. Like, when you're reading a book and you come across a sex scene, are you just like cringing and like, oh no, or, are you kind of into it? Do you seek out that kind of book? Do you read any actual romance and erotica? And definitely looking for recommendations there too. So let's talk about it. Now, what I am not going to spend a ton of time on is just stuff like Jonathan Franzen, like straight up literary fiction, which includes sex scenes, and often, like, unfairly is maligned for the so called cringiness or badness of those sex scenes. Yeah, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, so I won't. All I'll say is that, it's sort of unfair. People will judge sex scenes in a book like Freedom against, like, a romance novel, and it makes no sense because they're trying to do different things. So this isn't really what I want to talk about today, though. What I want to talk about are books like this one, and this is the one that inspired the video. So Love Me Back by Merritt Tierce is literary fiction, definitely. It's a story that's told in a rather unconventional manner. It's sort of vignettes, short stories, non-chronological. It's like a deep character study of a troubled young woman, let's say, and also possibly an indictment of the hospitality industry. So there's a lot going on. It's a short book, but it's doing a lot of things. It's doing them in an interesting way, and there is a ton of sex in this book. And sort of like Franzen and other literary fiction writers, for the most part, these sex scenes are not meant to titillate. They're not meant to get you in the mood. And actually, the whole, like, this book is rather, let's say, unsavory. Like, most of these sex scenes are degrading or actually abusive. They are showing a character who, in one sense is sort of spiraling out of control, but is also using sex as a way to stay in control in some weird ways. So there's a lot going on. It's very graphically depicted, though, which is different than sort of mainstream, I guess, literary fiction. So this was interesting. I like this kind of book. But the one scene in here that I want to talk about that was so interesting to me, there is a scene in here which is sort of sexy in the traditional sense. It depicts our narrator, Marie, having an encounter, not with anyone she's in a real relationship with or is in love with or anything like that, but they have sex, and it's really good. And it's sort of, we're meant to think, I think, that it's sort of the first time that she's had really good, like, gratifying sex. And that was so interesting to me because both in literature and just the world, let's say, there's such a fixation on the first time, and particularly with women and, our status as virgins or not virgins and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I would guess most people, and certainly me, like, when I think back on past encounters, I remember the first time it was good for me, and I would definitely say I spend more time thinking back on that than my actual first time, which, like many of us, was cringy and horrible. Um, so to see that kind of a sexual encounter depicted was just so revelatory. It was so interesting. It was depicted so lovingly. It was like this one golden moment in this book that is mostly like just gritty and dirty and awful and horrible, but she has this one moment where she just has this moment with this guy, and like I said, she doesn't end up falling in love with him, she doesn't end up marrying him, he doesn't end up saving her. Like, it's an encounter, and then it ends, and then she moves on to other things which are horrible and nasty. But yeah, like, so this is an example, I guess, of something that smutty literary fiction can do. So it is depicting graphic sex. In this one case, in this one scene, it is actually, like, kind of sexy, and you can definitely read it that way, but it's doing something interesting. It's like, to me, it was a comment on, like, how this stuff is usually depicted, and I just loved it. I really appreciated it. So this, this is my shit. Let's say this is the kind of stuff I'm looking for when I say smutty literary fiction. Another one that I'm currently reading, and this is sort of on the short fiction side. This is Smut by Bennett, and this was recommended to me by Too Tight Lautrec. And it's sort of a novella and a short story. Again, like sort of like with Love Me Back, it is depicting a sexual awakening, and I'm speaking of the first story here, but it's not like a naive ingenue. It's a 55-year-old widow, and I don't even want to say much about the whole scenario and the setup because it's so surprising and so original and so funny that it's just kind of, you should just discover it on your own. But again, I like that it's depicting a type of character that we don't often see in overly sexual situations. And this is, compared to Love Me Back, there's less sort of graphic sex, although there is some. There's a lot of sort of build up and stuff happening around it, but when it comes down to it, it is about the sex. I mean, it's called Smut. And the funny thing, too, I didn't know who Bennett was. Apparently, he's very well known, but he also wrote An Uncommon Reader, which made the rounds on book blogs and probably here, too. But that book, at least, came across to me as like one of those cutesy, kind of cozy reading night books about books. And I just, at the time, was like, gag me, like, no thanks. But then he comes out with something like this too, so I may have to reconsider An Uncommon Reader. But so this is another example of in this case it's just because it's so original and so funny. Maybe the shorter length of these stories kind of lends itself to that, but this is another example of what I'm looking for and what I mean when I say smutty literary fiction. Very quickly, two other examples in this sort of mini genre. The Bride Stripped Bare. This is anonymous in my edition, although I think they've identified the author. This one's interesting because it's kind of got parallel storylines. Like, it's got a historical storyline. The main character discovers a diary, and then it's got the modern day storyline, which has lots of sex in it. Sort of like Possession, but dirtier. It's been a long time since I read this, but I think this is kind of well known in this genre. So there's that one. And then the other one I just grabbed off my shelf real quick is After Claude by Owens, which I think was written in the 60s or 70s. So its depiction, very frank depiction of female sexuality, was probably like quite revolutionary at the time. And still I found this one very surprising, original, funny, horrifying. All, like with all of these, that's kind of what I'm looking for and what I appreciate in this genre. Like, just not your standard, oh, I'm having sex with this person for the first time and it was great and now we're in love. Like, that's been done. So literary smut, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I would love to hear, those of you out there who enjoy this kind of thing, if you have recommendations. And then I wanted to touch briefly on, let's say, smutty romance and actual erotica, because I do read that sometimes too. And the main difference for me there, well, I guess two. One is that the sex scenes in those kind of books, like, they are theoretically supposed to, let's say, set a mood, as opposed to like the literary stuff where sometimes it's meant to be kind of unsexy and bad. Supposedly these are supposed to be good. And I guess the other thing too, at least for me, in those kind of books, it still needs to be well written, but I can put up with a lot less realism, a lot less character development, a lot less plot. Let's say it's more about the actual sex scenes than it is sort of the stuff surrounding it. But it still has to be well written, and it still needs to avoid cliche, and that's where it gets really hard to find anything that really hits the spot, shall we say. So some of my go-tos are Alicia Ray and Lila Pace, and I recently went looking for a book like this. I'm not holding them up because, surprise, surprise, I tend to read these on my Kindle. So the one that I got a recommendation for was called Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, and it definitely fell into those traps. It started out okay. It was a bit of a slow burn, forbidden romance kind of thing with, lots of sex scenes and stuff, but it got very cliched very fast. We definitely have two very perfect characters who, like, the reason given to keep them apart is kind of dumb and contrived. It's that the girl in this scenario was dating the son of the guy, so yeah, there's also an age gap. But like, the guy is your typical sort of alpha male who's like very emotionally closed off because he's been hurt before and he's just not ready to open up. And the girl is like total Mary Sue, very naive. And it's just, and aside from that, the actual sex scenes themselves were very boring. Like if I'm reading that kind of book, if I'm looking for that kind of book, I'm looking for something at least a little different, you know. And there was really nothing memorable, nothing different, and the overall sort of meh quality of the writing and the cliches. By the end of it, I was very over it. And like for a book that sort of bills itself as smutty and has a lot of dirty parts and stuff, at the end it sort of inexplicably became very like happy ending, happily ever after, which, you know, I expected, but like, you know, oh, we're married now and we're having babies, and I'm like, ugh, like I'm married and have kids. I don't need to be reading about that. If I'm looking for that kind of book, that's not what I want to read. So anyways, I would love to hear anything you have to say, any recommendations for like actual romance, erotica, stuff in that vein. If you read Alicia Ray, that's what I'm looking for. So yeah, that's it. Comment below. Let me know what, I was going to say, let me know what you're into. That sounds wrong. Let me know what books you're into. Don't let me know what you're into. That's okay. Let's end this now before this gets more awkward. Thanks for watching.